I am George Schneider, a veteran of World War II in the European theater. I participated as a scout and observer in the 30th Infantry Division and participated in the 5 major campaigns: the Normandy, Northern France, the Rhinelands, the Ardennes, which was the Battle of the Bulge, and Central Europe. I'm doing a series of programs now about these 5 campaigns, each program being of one individual campaign. We've already done Normandy and Northern France, and today we'll talk about the Rhinelands Campaign. Now, the Rhinelands Campaign is a little disjointed. It started after the Northern France Campaign, which ended with the capture of Fort Iben-Emael in Belgium, and ended in March the 21st, 1945. And this was an extended period, but there was an interruption. There was a hiatus during the Battle of the Bulge, which was December 16th and lasted for 6 weeks. And during that time, the Rhinelands Campaign was suspended. So this is a disjointed campaign, but it will be the subject of today's program. After capturing Fort Iben-Emael, the Northern France campaign was officially over, and the Rhinelands Campaign began. The first thing we did was to cross the Albert Canal, which was a canal on the east side of the fort, and on the other side was the country of the Netherlands. And when we crossed the Albert Canal, the first village we liberated was a little village called Mensch, and that was the first village in the Netherlands to be liberated. And then the next city was Maastricht. Maastricht was a city of about 125,000, and we liberated that on September the 17th. And it's interesting that here we were almost on the border of Germany, and we had liberated the major city, the first major city in the Netherlands. And at this time, the coastal cities, the large coastal cities of Rotterdam and Amsterdam and The Hague, they were still in German hands, still occupied by Germany, and they would not be liberated until 6 months later, only about 6 weeks before the end of the war. And during this time of occupation, the Dutch people suffered severely, and thousands of them died from starvation. Now, after capturing Fort Iben-Emael and then getting into the Netherlands, we were now in Limburg province, which was right up against Germany. And we liberated other Dutch cities, namely Heerlen, Sittard, Valkenburg, and Kerkrade. In fact, Kerkrade was right up against Germany, and there's a main street in the city that parallels the front line, and one side is Dutch and the other side of the street is German. So that's how close we were to Germany. Now, within sight of Germany, we were now preparing to assault the Siegfried Line. Now, what was the Siegfried Line? This was a line of fortifications all along the German border, and it was similar to the Atlantic Wall in France, except the armament was quite different. There were no large artillery pieces, consisted mainly of 2 features. They had dragon's teeth, which were concrete reinforced structures about 4 to 5 feet tall, shaped similar to the Washington Monument. They were placed about 6 feet apart and 3 or 4 deep in rows snaking throughout the countryside. These were strictly defensive positions. There was no armament in the dragon's teeth, and they were designed to prevent tanks and other armament from crossing the border. And beyond that was their next line of defense, which consisted of pillboxes. Pillboxes were reinforced structures, often camouflaged as sheds or homes, and they were equipped mostly with machine guns that fired through slits that could traverse the entire front. Now, we were not quite ready to assault this. There'd still be a week or more in preparation. And we spent this week in a Dutch farmhouse overlooking the city of Rhinelands. And we enjoyed 1 week there, a very comfortable lodging. We had, I slept in the barn with the cows and enjoyed the heat from their bodies and enjoyed their milk. In fact, a friend of mine, Jack Holm, and I, we would milk cows into our canteen cup, and then we would take a D-bar. A D-bar was an emergency ration. It was a chocolate bar, very hard chocolate, fortified with vitamins and minerals, and could replace a ration in case of an emergency. We would shave some of this into the warm milk and heat it up a little bit more, throw a little sugar if we had it, and we had a cup of hot chocolate. So this was quite comfortable living, except we were being harassed by a large gun, much larger than a 155 howitzer. We didn't know where it was coming from, and they would lay these large shells on us in the environment. None of them ever hit the farm, but they were harassing us quite a bit. So we tried to locate where they were, where the gun was. So I was in the intelligence section. We had a small group of scouts, and two of us went one direction, two another, and then we looked for the flash of the gun, and we ran a simple triangulation problem and located that the gun was near a coal mine. This area had a lot of subsurface coal mines. The only other geographical feature was sugar beet fields all over between the villages. And but we couldn't see the gun. All we saw was a flash. So a priest from a nearby monastery or a convent approached us, and he said, "You'd like to know where that big gun is, wouldn't you?" And we said, "We sure would." He said, "It's at the entrance to a coal mine." He said, what it is, it's a large railroad gun that's on an inclined railroad at the opening of the mine. They would wheel it out to the front of the mine. They would fire a shot, and then the recoil would push it back into the mine, so we could never see the gun. So with this information, we called on some P-47 fighter planes, and they bombed the entrance, and we were no longer harassed by this gun. The next objective was the Siegfried Line, and this was actually attacked around September, the last of September and the 1st of October. By the 1st of October, we were on German soil, and we were never able to tell in letters what we were doing. All we could say was somewhere in, and you could name the country. So I wanted to document that I had been all the way through France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and into Germany before I was 20 years old. So on the 2nd of October, I wrote this letter, somewhere in Germany, and my birthday was October the 4th, so I did all this before I was 20. And 1 month later, 1944, November, was the presidential election. And I wasn't allowed to vote because I wasn't 21 years old yet. So now in the beyond the Siegfried Line, we liberated, or we didn't liberate, we captured German villages, mostly coal mining villages again, and then the attack on the city of Aachen began. That started on October the 2nd, and Actually, it was all still part of the fighting that took place after penetrating the pillboxes. And incidentally, these pillboxes would be destroyed once they were captured. And on the first day, on October the 2nd, our division captured and destroyed 50 of these pillboxes. That's an unusually large number to destroy in one day. And this was done by circling them to the rear and then attacking from the rear. All the guns were facing the other direction. And once the occupants were either killed or wounded or captured, then the engineers would come in and blow up the pillboxes. In the event that the Germans would counterattack, they would not be able to reoccupy these pillboxes. Now, the city of Aachen was a critical city to be captured, and turned out it was the first major German city to be captured. Aachen was an ancient city dating back 1,500 years, and this was the headquarters for Charlemagne. This the Charlemagne, the leader, back in 800 A.D. And at that time, it was called Aix-la-Chapelle, the French name, and the French still call it Aix-la-Chapelle. They don't call it Aachen. The plan was for our division and the 1st Division to encircle the city. And our division was to be aided by the 743rd Tank Battery, which was a tank battalion, a battalion, not a battery, a tank battalion that was with us all the way from Normandy. It was a wonderful outfit, gave us all the tank support we needed. And also we had elements of the 2nd Armored Division, which again was with us most of the time across Europe. Now, the 1st Division was in the south, and we were on the north, and the battle lasted for 3 weeks until the 21st of October, when the Germans finally surrendered. It was a very costly battle. We lost more men than any other unit. Our losses were over 3,000 killed or wounded. The 1st Division had 2,600 or 2,700 casualties. Now, about this time, the message center had a driver who was killed. Message center had 2 drivers, and one of these had been killed, and they asked if I would temporarily transfer to the message center as driver of one of the Jeeps. So I volunteered for this, and the message center's essential purpose was to communicate between battalion headquarters and the rifle companies, IKL, and the Heavy Weapons Company M, which had machine guns and mortars. And each company had 2 runners, and I associated with these 8 runners and got to know them quite intimately, real good friends, and still remember all of them. The I Company was Kenny Bedford and Pete Perez. K Company was Thomas and Tracolo. L Company was Storm and Applestein, and M Company was Rose and what was his name? We called him. He had been a postmaster, so we called him Jim Farley, but it wasn't Farley; it was Norris Farley. From this time to the end of the war, Thomas and Storm were killed, and Applestein was captured during the Bulge, and Rose was badly wounded. One of the other duties was to transport needed ammunition, perhaps, or rations to the rifle companies, and one of the more unpleasant ones was picking up the bodies of our own people. And I remember the worst I had was picking up one of our machine gunners that I found in a shed, He had the most horrified look I've ever seen on a face. He had his eyes and mouth were wide open, and he was holding his rosary between his thumb and his forefinger, and he was about a third of the way through the rosary when he had died. Very horrible picture to remember. Now, most of this time was spent in German villages capturing these. It was a bad weather conditions, muddy roads in all of the villages. None of them were paved. Cold and miserable, raining, and these were captured one at a time. And we had been in combat longer than any other division, so we were entitled to some kind of a rest period. So we were to be transported back to the Netherlands, and we were to be housed in Dutch villages in homes. They were going to provide us with a warm home and perhaps a bed to sleep in, and maybe a warm, hot meal. This never materialized. As soon as we got back to the Netherlands, and this was December the 16th, when we got back to the Netherlands, we were told something big is happening 35 miles south of here in Belgium, and in Luxembourg, but mostly in Belgium. And this was a German offensive which had started the 16th of December and became known as the Battle of the Bulge. So we no longer were getting a rest period. I was given a bottle of warm Coca-Cola as we boarded trucks to move. And I see documentaries on TV that say the one thing about the American soldier, he always had plenty of Coca-Cola everywhere he went. Well, that's a lie. That's not true. That bottle of Coke I got was the only one that I ever got, and it was warm. So don't believe everything you see on TV. So we made the move south, and when we got to the Battle of the Bulge, the Rhinelands Campaign essentially ceased to exist. And for the next 6 weeks, we would be in the Battle of the Bulge. Now, this is going to be covered in our next program. It's a 6 weeks battle, very severe, one of the worst there was. And after that, we resumed the Rhinelands Campaign again. So the Rhinelands Campaign stops on the 16th of December, 1944, and then we pick it up again on the 25th of January 1945. Now, we had suffered terrible losses in the Battle of the Bulge. Some of our rifle companies, of 150 men roughly, were down to 17 and 18 men of the original complement. Now, these all had to be replaced before we could continue. So we began replacing them, but most of them would not be replaced until we moved back up north, which was the plan. We were to move north and occupy the same areas that we'd been in Germany and in the Netherlands. And this was to be a move during the night, very secretively, because we didn't want the Germans to know where we were, because our division was noted for always spearheading attacks, and they didn't want the Germans to know where we were. But by the time we got back to Germany and the Netherlands, Axis Sally, who was a propaganda broadcaster, actually an American who got caught up in Berlin, was forced to broadcast propaganda programs. She had our division as her favorite division because we had encountered Hitler's personal SS division 3 times and defeated them 3 times. So we were her pet division, and she called us Roosevelt's SS troops because Hitler's favorite division was an SS division. And I don't know where she was getting all her information, but she even gave us the password, and she would have the right password. It's the amazing thing about it. So we reorganized when we got back up north, and we still had some German territory between us and the Rhine River, which was going to be our last major objective. This was the last natural geographical feature between us and the race to Berlin. So we began preparing for the Rhine crossing, which meant bringing in supplies, mostly pontoons to build a bridge with. These were large pontoons. We had 2.5-ton trucks trucking them up as close as they could get them to the river. They were so large that they hung over the tailgate of 2.5-ton trucks and the other end up over the cab of the truck. These were stockpiled in preparation for the crossing. And the other feature was artillery shells, which were piled in great piles all along the roads in the Netherlands. And these would be used to initiate the largest artillery barrage in the history of the war in Europe. Now, we still had the city of Jülich to capture, and Jülich was not that big a city, but today it's quite a thriving city. They even have a nuclear power plant there. And so we captured other cities in this area between the Ruhr River and the Rhine River. The Ruhr River was another river we had to cross. It wasn't as big as the Rhine, of course. And the crossing of the Ruhr was considered a classic military maneuver. We crossed it after a large artillery barrage, which was up until then the largest that had ever been in Europe, until it was eclipsed by the one when we crossed the Rhine. Everything went according to the book, and we managed to cross the Ruhr River. And then we still had some German villages to cross before we got to the Rhine, which took a few more days, and we would be crossing the Rhine on the 21st of March, and the Rhinelands Campaign would officially end. Now, the Rhinelands Campaign lasted for a long time, and it was in terrible country to fight. Actually, we were on German soil, so they were defending homeland quite severely. And I would rank this with Normandy and the Rhine, the Ardennes, or the Battle of the Bulge. It was very fierce. We had great casualties here. The 300 or the 3,000 from the attack in Aachen was the largest number that we had in any particular battle in the Rhinelands. Now, about a week before the Rhinelands Campaign ended, I was asked if I would drive for the Assistant Battalion Commander, Captain Christie. He had lost 3 drivers, the last one being blown up into a tree after hitting a landmine. So I volunteered for Captain Christie, and this would be a very short relationship because I'll tell you about that in the final campaign, which will be the Central Europe campaign, and that'll be a very short story about Captain Christie and my relationship with him. So the Rhinelands ends on the 21st, a very bloody one, and with that, I bid you goodbye until the next session, which will be the Battle of the Bulge or the Ardennes campaign. So hope to see you then. Until then, Goodbye.